welcome to Daily Debrief brought to you by People's Dispatch. I am Shreya, and in today's episode, we discuss Lebanon's historic protest movement that overthrew the government. We also talk about labor action by Apple Store workers in US and Australia. And finally, a look at the ongoing trial of Brazilian footballer Neymar for fraud. Monday, October 17, marked the anniversary of Lebanon's protest movement, which began in 2019 against rising taxes on various services provided by the state. The series of protests later grew into a major anti government movement, calling out the economic and political crisis in the country and demanding reforms, which led to the then Prime Minister Saad Hariri resigning from his position. Abdul from People's Dispatch is here with us to talk about what has happened since in Lebanon. Hi Abdul, thank you for joining us. Can you tell us what have been the major developments in Lebanon since 2019 and what has the economic crisis looked like in these 2 years?
I think all the data published by different organizations show that the economic condition in Lebanon has not improved a bit since 2019. In many cases, it has gone worse. If you see the reports coming about people barging into the banks, trying to quote unquote steal their own money, loot their own money, the desperate measures taken by people, which ultimately led to the government for a while shutting down the banks and all. It seems that the overall economic condition in Lebanon has gone bad. We know there are reports about long power cuts, then the Lebanese currency losing its value more than 95%. Government is forced to, for after 25-30 years, forced to kind of change the value of readjust the value of local currency with the dollar, and all those things are happening. There are temporary you can say ad hoc measures taken to kind of address some of the conditions. Government is also negotiating a deal with IMF, $3 billion deal with IMF and all, but none of them, it seems, are working on the ground for the betterment of the Lebanese people. So, if we have to summarize what is the development since 2019, we can only say the situation has gone bad to us when it comes to economic condition in Lebanon, and that has also reflected in various political and social issues in Lebanon.
And understand a little better, Abdul, can you tell us what triggered the protests initially in 2019 and what has been the government's response from then onwards?
In 2019, of course, the economic situation of the common Lebanese was already bad for various reasons. The mismanagement of the economy, the corruption, alleged corruptions, then the war in Syria. We should understand that Syria and Lebanon economies are quite interdependent. So all those things had already created a very bad situation in Lebanon. Over and above that, the Lebanese government at the time, Saad Hariri government at the time, tried to impose some kind of tariffs on various services provided by the private firms also, as well as the government, which was the basic trigger for the protests which started in late October, which ultimately forced the Saad Hariri government to resign. And since then, Lebanon has been run by caretaker prime ministers. Despite the fact that there was an election earlier this year, that election has not led to any formation of a kind of stable government in Lebanon. As far as the responses on the political front on economic front is concerned, as I said before, Lebanese government has tried to negotiate a deal with IMF, and because of the deal, of course, there are conditionalities attached with it, which means the government has to kind of cut subsidies. Imagine a situation where the people are already suffering because of their purchasing power is going down, economic crisis becoming bad to worse because of the COVID and because of the failure of the successive governments to do anything on all those issues. Then recently, the global rise in the prices of fuel, and food further deteriorated the situation. Among all these, the government was under the because of the conditionalities put by the IMF, was forced to reduce the subsidies on fuel and other basic services, which has created the situation even which has made the situation even worse. Uh, Meanwhile, one should also remember the impact which the blast, Beirut port blast, created,
Yes.
which led to billions of dollars of property destruction, apart from hundreds of people dying and thousands of people becoming homeless in a country which is already in what World Bank and other international agencies says that the historically one of the worst economic crises ever faced by any country in the world. That country also faced this kind of uh, blast, COVID, global inflation. All these has basically led to a kind of a very precarious situation for the common Lebanese at this moment.
In our next story, workers at the Apple store in Charleston Square, Newcastle, walked out in on October 18 as part of a nationwide industrial action by the Retail and Fast Food Workers Union. In a first of its kind strike, the protesters are campaigning for job security, living wages, fair leave provisions, and workplace safety measures. Meanwhile, Apple workers in Oklahoma City in the United States scored a significant win in their bid to join the Communication Workers of America, becoming the second store out of 270 retail locations in the US to unionize. We have Anish with us joining us today for more interesting details on this issue. Hi Anish, so national strike by workers in Australia. What do we know so far? Can you tell us?
Yes, so this is sort of a historic strike in the sense that this will be the first time that retail store employees will be holding industrial action across Australia. It's a nationwide one. So this is pretty much like the first time in history that Australia is witnessing such a sort of a industrial action. Uh, and it definitely has its own impact because despite the small numbers, we have to remember that the organizers are a very small number. The level of unionization, even though Australia is one of those first world nations with a high level of unionization, the level of unionization among Apple Store workers is much low. So it means that the organizers are going to be a very small percentage, but they are definitely talking about issues that are affecting more than 4,000 workers across Australia. And so that in itself is a major milestone. The action itself is a major milestone. It was not like an extended strike. It was an industrial action which included a set of different set of worker imposed bans and actions that barely spanned an entire day, but definitely it made not just national headlines but international headlines, as we can know. Uh, to add to that, we have to remember that the kind of demands that they are pushing for, which is about fair contract, very fair, very basic terms and conditions that retail workers are are entitled to, are not being considered even by the Apple uh, corporation. And one of the things that we can talk about is the fact that their new set of wage hike scheme, which includes about 2.5 to 2.7% annual wage hike, will only be applicable to those workers who only receive the minimum wage, the national federal minimum wage levels, and that is uh, less than 30% of their entire working Apple Store population. So, which means that more than 70% of the workers will not be entitled to any wage hike, and that itself shows the sort of problematic terms and conditions that Apple is trying to push on its workers on in Australia. So definitely, this mobilization is highlighting a major set of problems that exist even in a highly unionized or a relatively highly unionized country like Australia. And it shows that, and we have to remember that does not mean that many of these workers are not part of the unions. Many of them have started taking up the the RAFU unions and work organizers as their representatives in their battle, in their arbitration battle against the corporation. So, which means that a large number of them are, in fact, inclined towards joining unions. It's just that we see a significant level of, intimidation and, kind of very threatening sort of situation that even right now we saw Apple threatening these mobilizers who did not really do, like, it was not even a 24-hour day, 1 day strike. It was a very limited set of industrial action, and they're already threatening them with pay cuts. So which shows how rampant and how kind of like almost global set of anti-union tendency that Apple comes with, especially when it comes to dealing with its workers, when it comes to arbitrating with workers for fair wage and fair contracts.
And Anish, we talked of Australia, but something similar is happening in the US where there's increasing unionization when it comes to Apple Store workers. Can you also tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, so as we speak, this a second Apple Store union has formed in Oklahoma City in the United States. This is the second such store this year to actually vote in favor of unionization. The first happened in Maryland. And this also is significant considering the fact that this happened in Oklahoma. Oklahoma is one of the states which has very low proportion of unionized labor. It's barely about a little more than 5% of the total working population. And it has laws that discourage workers from participating in union activities and being a part of labor organizations. So, in a state like that, you have workers coming together, retail workers again, coming together to actually form union in an Apple store, no less, which is, again, as I said, is kind of pushing the same sort of anti-union activities and tendencies that other major retail chains and corporations have pushed for in the United States. Shows the sort of dedication and the kind of popularity that unionization itself has, in even in a deep south strongly anti-union kind of state like Oklahoma. So it is definitely a significant step forward. We know that there will be more such appeals uh, and requests for unionization with the National Labor Board, and we can count on those votes happening in the coming months. So it definitely, obviously, we are talking about just two unions out of more than 200 odd Apple stores across the United States. So it is definitely still just a beginning, but it definitely shows that Apple, and it's not just Apple. We have talked about Amazon very recently. Talked about very similar set of very new unions being formed in retail chains, especially in the hospitality and fast food sector. Even in the gig economy, we have seen increasing worker mobilization in the United States, and this is obviously an extension of the kind of mobilization, labor mobilization that is happening right now in the US. Obviously, Australia is also going through the same. We are seeing the sort of because obviously many of these corporations are multinational, transnational in many ways. They have influences in states of different countries as well. But in the same manner, you have workers trying to mobilize across different countries on similar lines. And so this is the very sort of the same kind of mobilization that we're seeing in the US as well. And we have to wait and see how big this is going to be. Obviously, we did not expect when the first few Starbucks stores, when we talked about earlier this year in the show itself, unionized earlier this year. Not many expected more than 200 or hundreds of them just suddenly filing submissions for unionization. So definitely we have to see whether there will be a similar sort of domino effect coming up. Uh, Organizers are definitely hopeful, but we have to really just wait and see how it pans out in the next couple of months.
Brazilian footballer Neymar is currently on trial for alleged irregularities over his transfer to Barcelona. The Brazilian forward is currently facing 2 years in prison over these charges as his team prepares to head to Qatar next month for the World Cup. Siddhant Annie joins us with the latest updates on this issue. Hi Siddhant, thank you for joining us. Can you give us the details of this trial?
Yeah, as much as possible. And like you were saying a little while earlier when we were talking, Shreya, because the details essentially pertain to what one company, which is a Brazilian investment company called DIS, it's a company owned by someone who is a supermarket sort of magnate in Brazil, one of the owners of one of the biggest supermarket chains. So this is their investment wing, and essentially the story goes that when Neymar was very young, this super rich person, the owner of these supermarkets, who goes by the name of Delcy Sonda, fronted a lot of money. He claims millions to the parents of Neymar for various things. In the sort of with the understanding that as this player grew up and became a valuable commodity, then he would own, or his company would own, a share in the overall value of Neymar. So DIS currently owns 40% of the value of this person, and is now suing on the grounds that when he was transferred from the Brazilian football club Santos to the Spanish football club Barcelona, there were some secret agreements between between Barcelona and Santos, as well as Barcelona and Neymar's family, that cut them out of what they should have received as the 40% owners of Neymar. So the Spanish prosecutor's office has examined the claim and has found that there is enough grounds to sort of prosecute on, and they are now demanding quite heavy fines for all of them, because I suppose the Spanish state also feels like it has been cut out of its share of the transactions, I suppose.
All right, yeah.
Right. So it's a very sort of complicatedly framed contract as well, and the allegations are sort of, for example, that a friendly match was agreed on between Santos and Barcelona, right? And if it didn't happen within a stipulated time, then Barcelona would have to pay a fine of so many million euro. So the company is arguing that all of these clauses were premeditated and built into the contract, simply because no one wanted to pay them a cut. And no one is refuting also the charges in terms of the sequence of events. Everyone is saying, yes, this is on paper, we have signed these documents, etc., etc. But all of the accused, which includes Neymar's parents, as well as two former presidents of Barcelona Football Club and a president of Santos Football Club, they've all denied any wrongdoing in the process.
Siddhant, like you mentioned, can you also tell us how does a player come to be transferred? As in, what is this whole system and what are the problems with this system?
Yeah, I guess the biggest problem with the transfer market system is that it commodifies players, and that works differently depending on where you come from. If you are a European player and you have you come from a particular system in the West, then maybe you are able to navigate the transfer market in a normal way. But what happens in the case of players coming in from Africa and in the case of South America, we see this very frequently, where several companies or investors or even could be even individuals, law firms, whatever, any holding companies, they all own these bit parts of a player's overall what is considered their value, right? So and for them, therefore, the only way they get paid is if this player goes for a huge sum of money to one of these clubs in Europe. They are the only ones who have the buying power. For a while, the Chinese Super League was also trying to do it, and several other leagues in smaller countries. Let's say if you have a lot of oil money and you want, put it somewhere, you do that. But what essentially happens is that a lot of these huge sums of money circle around from one party to the other, And in the bargain, because Neymar was 19 when all of this conversation was going on, right, back in 2011. So I doubt very much that he was privy to the conversations between these two presidents of clubs. I doubt he was even that privy to conversations that might have taken place between the president of the club and his father, for example, who was making his financial decisions. So yeah, it's a very complicated system, and I think kids who are coming from these kind of backgrounds like Neymar, where you don't have access to great education and all that, all you do is play a sport, and you do that really, really well. So you think everyone around you will sort out the rest of it. But it ends up being quite often, and you've seen this in the case of several big players who have come from South America to Europe, where there are either tax fraud or tax evasion issues, where authorities say that they haven't declared their incomes rightly. Same kind of allegations that my family took payments, etc., etc. So yeah, it's and of course the other part of it is that Neymar's family also says that all this happened in Brazil, where none of this is illegal. So the Spanish courts don't necessarily have any jurisdiction here.
Okay.
So a settlement is going to be the likely end, but in the meantime, it's a little bit of an interesting, I suppose, news peg to talk about this transfer market and how increasingly players who really have very little say in it become commodities that are traded on a market that they don't understand, and that many of us find very, very, there's so many layers, it's quite opaque, and everything is it's quite tough to figure out what's actually going on.
Thank you. And I think the part about the commodification of the players doesn't really get highlighted much. Thank you so much for doing that today. And that's all we have for today, folks. For more such stories, keep following peoplesdispatch.org and also follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook.